So good afternoon, everybody. This is my second outing on the red couch, now with Khushwant Singh. So actually, I just want to throw this question at him. How does he feel with a name like Khushwant Singh?
Well, I would have been better off with Natha Singh, but such is life. So I have this name, and I have to go. I went through the entire process of it, but that's fine. My grandfather named me actually Khushwant Singh. Yeah. So there's there are many stories. I used to write for the BBC Online, and once they sent me a payment, and it went to Khushwant Singh's address, the receipt. So he called up a friend of his. He says, "Hey, munda, mere paise chori karke le gaya." So all these things, many instances. But here I am.
Yes, because I had a couple of people come up and ask. So I know you're alive, but so that's why I thought I'd ask. Anyway, so this is the book that we are talking about today, the Opium Toffee. I know that when I picked it up to read, the title intrigued me because, of course, it says many things. There is opium and there is toffee. But let's listen to how you came to this title and what you thought, like how did you pin it down on this?
Hi, everyone. So actually, we all understand that opium is a very common drug that is used uh, in Punjab, especially in the Malwa area. So somehow I just loved it. Just so what they do basically is that when they consume opium, people they make these little toffees out of it, and then they consume it. So I just was somehow it just came to me, the opium toffee, and I wanted to write a story out of Punjab. The story is set during the turbulent phase of Punjab, and I just loved the title. And actually, I weaved the book around the title more than anything else. I didn't want to lose the title, so it just happened.
So I'm going to ask you to read actually, because then we can actually begin with Punjab. Punjab being center stage as the backdrop of this book, and the 80s, as you mentioned.
Uh, so the passage that I'll read basically is not the very serious narrative, but I'll just read just before Punjab had set into, this phase of terrorism, and how life was, and maybe some part is autobiographical in that, and just that passage, it'll give you a flavor of how life was in Punjab. Maybe I can start with that. Yes. So it's basically, I mean, I lived on a farm till my parents decided to shift to Chandigarh. So it's basically a story of farm life. It took them some time to reach the countryside, which Dad liked to refer to as Partridge Country. Dad usually followed the Hoshiarpur Chandigarh highway towards Chandigarh for 10 minutes, and then, depending on his gut feeling, took the link road either to the left or the right of the highway. After zigzagging through a few small villages, the link road opened into a green expanse. It was a mix of lush green wheat or pea fields, forested kicker tree plantations, and sarkanda or wild grass, a perfect home to partridges, as the kicker and the wild grass offered the ideal environment for roosting, feeding, and breeding. Ajit would pray that his dad take a left turn, as all of his dad's admirers on the way, the best of the lot, lived on the left of the highway, especially Pandit Umeshji, who always offered him Campa Cola. Unlike Dad's other devotee, Karnail Singh, who lived in a village along the highway. Being a dairy farmer, Karnail Singh always coaxed Ajit to drink 2 glasses of fresh milk, which he dreaded. There was no escaping Karnail Singh's eagle eye, and the probability of bumping into him was 100%. An early riser, since that was the demand of his profession, he was out in the cowshed whenever they crossed his village. A huge multicolored woolen blanket, which he wore over his kurta pajama, covered half his face and ran down to his knees. Apart from the buckle, a shawl or blanket wrapped around one's upper body to keep warm, he always wore an untidy turban that pulled his eyebrows to the top of his head. All this would have been okay if he didn't tag along with them for the partridge hunt. In the process, much to the dislike of the young lad, Karnail would not only dislodge him from the front seat position, but also insist on carrying his own gun, an antique .12 bore he had inherited from his father, who had served in the British Indian Army. Ajit had heard about guns backfiring, and he was sure Karnail's gun was one of those, the barrel of which would explode in the station wagon one day. The number of cartridges Karnail fired to get one bird could burst open a barrel of a tank. Ajit thought about this more because the cartridges that Karnail fired were all pulled out from Ajit's pocket, a complete waste given the difficulty with which they had been procured. According to his dad, cartridges were hard to come by, as there were problems erupting in Punjab. So that's how life changes after that for Ajit.
So that actually brings you squarely into the novel, and also I think into much of what your focus is, because you're always looking at Punjab. You live there. You lived through this turbulent time. You saw it firsthand. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, about how, when you lived on the farm and then Chandigarh and people you met? Because a lot of it would be personal experience, the stuff that's in the book.
I think for me, it's more about a lost childhood. Why I say a lost childhood, I think every person from my generation would agree to that, who lived in Punjab. I mean, imagine at 5 p.m. you're told, you can't play your cricket game, now get your bat ball back, and it's dark. That's a lost childhood. And I think the biggest, what I look at it, is that during your childhood, during your teenage, I was in college, I saw everything around, you saw the boys, you saw the cops. You couldn't go wrong while growing up. I mean, there was no space that you could go wrong, which is, in a teenage life when you're growing up, there's so much that's happening. So if there was no space, for that. So one wrong step, which perhaps the book talks about also, either the boys got you or the cops got you. So that was the kind of living we had, and so the book largely comes out of that feeling and out of that experience, So for me, that was a big thing, that there's no space to go wrong today. Young people can, they experiment, they do so many things. So yeah, from that perspective, yes.
And then, of course, the fact that you've decided that you would actually be looking at, because it's a very layered novel, there are lots of strands to pick up, apart from the actual story, the love story. The fact that you've used fiction, I mean, you could have done this in non-fiction, but you decided to tell the stories through fiction.
So there's another novel of mine, Maharaja in Denims, which is again, set in Punjab, but it's from Maharaja Ranjit Singh's era. It's juxtaposed between contemporary Punjab, India, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh's time, 1701, 1801 to 1839. And I think storytelling can only happen through the form of fiction. For Punjab, everything is sitting in non-fiction. And for a nation, for everyone to have this shared pain, a novel is very important. Then for example, now this is being, adapted into a web series, for example. So larger people will be able to see it. I was speaking at the New York Lit Fest, and I was talking about Maharaja and Denims and talking about this idea of shared pain through storytelling. And there was this gentleman, Jerry Fisher, he was heading the Jewish Federation of New York. So he got up and said that actually it is true, because the entire story of Holocaust and that story came out once it came into novels. Then movies were made and everything, So I think for me that's very important, to bring out the Punjab story. I mean, I've written biographies also, but to bring it out through this novel there was an idea behind it, for like I'm sitting in Bangalore, talking about it today. So there's this shared pain. If people read it, they can understand what Punjab went through and relate to it, rather than actually just, creating these impressions through this untrained media now.
And yet, I mean, I think most of us who don't live there, who don't see reality there, are prone to go by what we see as stereotypes of Punjab, of Punjabis, all the paneer eating Punjabis, and the music, everything has become like a stereotype. Much of it is not nice, and there's loudness and crassness and glorification of violence. There's gun culture, all of those things, masculinity excessive to an excessive degree, that machismo which you show off. Uh, what do you think about that and of breaking this stereotype? Because in the novel you have a tender kind of love story with a love that seems to transcend lots of obstacles, and you also have a fashion model.
Well, it's a love story. I mean, I never actually wrote it like a love story. It's everyone talks about it as a love story. I just wrote it as a story of Punjab of two people. So it's now they say that it's a story. It's a story out of an era of conflict. Now. I mean, that is there. We have gone down actually. But I wrote a book titled Six Unlimited in 2005, and some of the people I featured were these musicians in the UK. They were very iconic people and the music was so nice, soft, and very traditional. But ever since this whole thing has shifted to Canada, I just see that this whole gang culture has come in, and the kind of music with guns, all that stuff. I mean, that's not Punjabi music as such. I mean, maybe it's a reflection of a lifestyle of a few people, but normal Punjabis don't live like that. We don't. I'm not carrying a gun and sitting here, or if there's a music, I don't dance and drink like that and fire in the air. I don't do that. So there are Punjabis who only a section of those people, and it's glorified. But then we've had the beautiful tradition of Sufi music. We've had the beautiful tradition of folk music, which is. But then I've highlighted these ills of, this thing. And talking about the supermodel, basically there's this Shabnam Singh. She becomes this top supermodel of the country, and basically that's a reaction to patriarchy. So why I made her a supermodel is because I think they're like opposite, so that's the extreme you get when you react to patriarchy. And during terrorism time, there was this diktat in 1989 by the radicals that women could only wear salwar kameez. So this girl has reacted to that whole thing. So basically it's to show that. And I think the supermodel was this. And once I was making her a model, why not a supermodel? And at the top of it, at the top of the game. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just because on the one side you have all these very serious things happening, and of course there's
that
opium.
was also the contrast of Punjab. I mean, we had Miss India's winning during terrorism. I think Manpreet, she became a Miss India during this whole phase when Punjab was, and yeah.
The other thing that I know that I particularly enjoyed was your descriptions of Chandigarh and the Jats. And if there are Punjabis here, especially from those areas, you'll understand the Gedis and this whole Jat culture that exists over there. You talk about it, about the Malwa region. So tell us a little bit about, this breakup of the different regions, Maja Malwa, and then particular characteristics that you've actually put down here, very interestingly.
So Chandigarh is, my parents shifted to 79 to Chandigarh. I was only 7 years old. And it was funny, when I reached there, I lived on a farm. My personal experience of Chandigarh, which I've narrated, is someone said, "Abhe sale kya karega?" I didn't know what this means, what sale means. I was from the Marchods, Panchods sort of culture, in a village. And I went up to my mom and asked that, "What's sale?" And I mean, really, I thought that guy is a weakling, if he's using that kind of an abusive language, Saleh. And Chandigarh for me was different. I'd never lived. See, we had rented a place on a first floor. We'd never lived on a first floor. I didn't even realize that two families could live in one house. I didn't even know that pani khatam ho gaya. We just had a tube well and the pani wo chalta tha, pyare pani chala. And it used to be like that. So these were my encounters in Chandigarh when I shifted. And Punjab is divided into three parts. They're geographical actually areas. the Maja, the Doaba, and Malwa, and they're very, very different. They're very different in dialect, they're very different in approaches to life. And I come from Doaba. Doaba is largely the educated lot. Mr. Chopra is here, he's from Kapurthala, so he would vouch for that. Okay, perfect.
I'm
So
from Maja.
you're from Maja, so you would know which area, what is your area
Maja is
about?
the heartland,
Is the heartland and where?
of course.
Well, and also I think Amritsar was developed as the religious capital and the trade center by Maharaja Ranjit Singh, whereas Lahore was the political capital. So Amritsar has a lot of, if you take a walking tour around the Golden Temple, you'll be surprised to see the kind of business and the education and the kind of akhadas. So akhadas we connect with Palwani only, with wrestling, but they're centers of learning. So there are so many akhadas around the Golden Temple that you'll be surprised. Even when there is an akhada, when you see these guys who come on a Saturday and to ask for alms, for begging, and they're dressed in a particular way. There's an akhada for their training also. So akhadas are centers of learning. But then Maja people, should they be in a mood to shoot someone, they will go ahead and do it. And Malwa is largely an uneducated part of Punjab, but now obviously cities have grown and education in Punjab is.
And entire villages that have gone away, actually, in Malwa especially, isn't it? I mean, was that the area where people started migrating right in the beginning? Doaba is the one.
Doaba is the yeah. So this book
Doaba
has
is the
another
one.
layer. The book has this another layer of illegal migration. So this boy basically has to, So a lot of people migrated during terrorism. So a lot of people left the country. A lot of people took asylum in other countries. So this boy also goes through this journey. It's called, I don't know, they're coming out with a movie called Donkey, but actually the word is Donkey Lana. I don't know why donkey, but Donkey Lana means like you're a khota when basically you are crossing these mountain passes and all as illegal immigrants. So the agents call it Donkey Lana. And so this boy goes through this entire journey of Donkey Lana to reach wherever he has to. So the book has that layer also. So it has all the layers of Punjab basically, all the layers of Punjab. The story goes through so many layers of this boy and this girl, And the first scene, like where he's set in London. And the interesting part is that in my entire novel, all my novels, I have actually written every scene by visiting the site. So if it was for Maharaja in Denims, where I'm writing about Maharaja Ranjit Singh and he's talking about, his son Duleep Singh, it's written in Elvedon Hall, it's written there. If this first scene is written at the Strand itself, right next to Savoy Hotel. So all my scenes are written largely exactly on the spot.
Yeah, and then interestingly, you've made a comment somewhere when you talked about going to London to do this scene, and then you've made a comment in some interview, I think, which I read, where you said that you'd actually planted about 1,500 trees to offset the carbon footprint. So that I find quite amazing as well.
So just before my book was being published, I was sitting and having coffee, and this friend of mine, we started talking about the carbon imprint one book leaves, the publishing of it, the transporting of it. I've traveled to Bangalore via flight for my scenes, so everything, And so he suggested, that why don't you buy carbon credits? I said, what do you mean carbon credits? So we got into a discussion. He says, okay, here's an idea, you can do it. Can you plant 1,500 trees? Because he calculated this thing that, 1,500 trees is what will offset the carbon imprint. Under forest conditions, basically you need 800 trees, 1,500. So I said, okay, hold on. I called up the forest conservator. I said, can you do this for me? He says, we will plant. And we planted 1,500 trees to offset the carbon imprint of the book, which I think should become part of it today, uh, part of the publishing industry's thought process, that how can we deal with this? I mean, this is all carbon footprint which we are leaving. So how do we offset it, whether through buying carbon? I know everyone can't plant 1,500 trees, but whether we buy carbon footprints or go into some sort of a, yeah.
So I think this is going to be my last question because we are being told it's time.
Oh, it's half an hour?
But I do want you to talk a little bit about Amrinder Singh and working with him, and maybe tell us a incident, an anecdote of when you were working on the book with him.
Well, I wrote his biography titled The People's Maharaja. So I'd written Fauja Singh's biography also, the oldest marathon runner. So there were absolutely two contrasting personalities, I wrote about. And Amrinder's was a very rich biography because obviously an erstwhile royal, so there was so much of history. And then he was associated with uh, the secret talks, during, he was representing Mrs. Gandhi, and he was in talks with Pindrawale and all the stakeholders at that time. So it's a very rich book, of this thing. But, anecdote, what do I tell you? So Captain Amrinder, once he's stuck on something, it's very difficult to get him through that. So there was this particular incident that I knew what I've written is correct, but he was disagreeing with it. It was the date of when he was the chief minister. The Congress had interfered in the elections of the Shiromani Prabandhak Committee. And he would say, no, this I did it at the instance of something called the India International Group, which was Dr. Manmohan Singh, Kuldeep Nayyar, and 3-4 other he was saying. But that was not the fact. So now the point is that he would keep calling up people. Do you remember that when did I do this? I think I did it, on their saying, and no one would say no to him. Everyone would say, Hanji, Hanji, bilkul do. That's correct. And so it was so difficult. So then I decided that, let me not talk about this. And I came back to him after about 10 days, and then we sorted it. But once he got stuck on something, it was very difficult to get through to him and convince him that, your fact is wrong, my fact is right. But it was lovely working, 4 years.
One question. Mender Singh has moved from a Taliban, Congress, BJP, and his own, made his own commission. So 4 political parties, ex-royal, and one short comment on that.
Well, I'm a biographer. I'll write what he does.
He has a good biography.
So we're not going to take questions because we are out of time, but you can definitely go get a copy of the book, get it signed, and ask as many questions as you like.
I'm supposed to rush there. That's what they say.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Such a pleasure.